The White House thrummed with quiet expectation. A small group of veterans had been invited for an evening with President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump, an event meant to honor service. Though for many guests the feelings were mixed, gratitude braided with lingering questions and old griefs. Colonel Grace Holloway sat with a calm that came from long practice. At 70, her silver hair was pinned back, a cane leaning against her chair. She had been a nurse through 3 wars. She carried both the dignity of survival and the heavy knowledge of what survival costs. Melania greeted each guest with a warm smile. Trump moved down the line with his customary firmness, shaking hands and offering thanks. When he reached Grace, he held her hand a beat longer than usual. Instead of letting go, she looked him straight in the eye. "Mr. President," she said, voice low but steady, "someday I hope you'll hear the truth from someone who lived it." Her words landed. Melania glanced over, attentive. Trump's face remained measured, but something in the room shifted. Laughter and applause continued elsewhere in the ballroom. But beneath the polite bustle, a different current ran. Curiosity. A kind of attentive silence. As the evening wound down and guests drifted away, Trump found Grace seated near a corner under the chandeliers. Melania stood beside him. "You said you wanted me to hear the truth," Trump said quietly. "I'm listening." Grace smoothed her skirt and inhaled. "I was 20 the first time I thought war meant glory," she began. "It doesn't. War breaks people in ways no metal can fix. I've watched soldiers beg, not for their country, but for one more sunrise, for their mothers, their children. I've held hands as boys left this world. I wrote the letters home. I learned to carry the silence so others wouldn't see." Melania placed a hand over Grace's. The staff pretended to tidy the room. Secret Service kept a respectful distance. Even the chatter dimmed. Grace's words were small and terrible and plain. "Leaders speak of victory," she said. "They stand in the light. But the cost, the empty chairs at dinner tables, the marriages that unravel, the invisible wounds that follow home, that's the silence we live in. I swore if I ever met someone with power, I'd tell them. Tonight, that's you." For a long moment, Trump said nothing. When he did, the edge was gone from his voice. "You think leaders forget the cost?" he offered. "They don't mean to," Grace replied. "The spotlight blinds them. But forgetting has consequences." Her fingers tightened on her lap cane. "My husband, Captain Daniel Holloway, never came home. The nation thanked me, but no one ever asked if I had wanted that sacrifice." Melania's eyes shone. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Sorrow is not enough," Grace said. "Remember it, carry it. When you speak, when you decide, when cameras flash, see the empty chairs. Hear the names." Something in Trump shifted. "I support our veterans," he said slowly. "But support must be more than hospitals and medals." Grace nodded. "Support is listening when it hurts," she said. "If leaders carried a fraction of this silence, fewer wars would start." He leaned forward, no longer speaking as a man polished for cameras, but as someone trying to understand. "Tell me everything," he said. "Not the filtered version. The real truth." Grace's eyes softened. "All right. But promise me you won't see me as a critic. See me as a messenger for the voices you'll never meet." "You have my word," Trump said. She told him then, quietly and without flourish, about the boy who begged her to tell his mother he was brave. About the hundreds of letters she had written with hands that trembled but refused to show it. About private funerals and the nights the memories came unbidden. She named one, Private Hernandez, 18, who wanted to marry a girl back home. Grace had sat with him until his last breath and then lived with him in memory. Melania covered her mouth. Trump bowed his head. "I can't say I understand," he admitted, "but I want to. I owe it." "That's the first step," Grace said, "wanting to understand." They stayed like that for a long time. 2 people, across an ocean of public life and private grief, sharing a truth that had been held too long by those who had seen wars hush. The ballroom's splendor felt suddenly thin beside the quiet weight of what she had given them. Not accusation, but a charge. To remember the cost when the cameras go out and the applause fades. The silence thickened. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum with reverence. Trump finally broke it, his voice firm but softer than before. You said earlier you'd tell me the truth, Grace. I'm hearing it now. But I must ask, why tonight? Why tell me this now? Grace's lips curved into a faint smile. Because time is short. I'm 70. My body is slowing, my nights are restless. I may not have many chances left. If the truth isn't spoken now, it may never be. Melania leaned forward, gently squeezing her hand. Then tonight you've spoken for many who could not. Grace nodded. For the first time all evening, her shoulders eased. Trump leaned in, his eyes fixed on hers. So tell me, what would you have me do? If I carry this truth, how do I turn it into action? Grace thought for a long moment. I don't expect miracles, sir. I expect honesty. Speak not only of victory, but of cost. Remind this nation that freedom isn't free, and the bill isn't just paid on battlefields. It's paid at kitchen tables, in hospital rooms, in folded flags. Her voice grew stronger. And when you meet veterans, don't just thank them. Ask them. Ask what still hurts. Ask what they still carry. Too many stay silent because they believe no one wants to hear. Melania's eyes glistened. Listening itself can be healing. Trump tapped the table lightly, thinking. I've always believed in strength. But you're telling me strength is also in listening? Yes, Grace said simply. Strength is when a leader carries the silence with his people, not above them, with them. Trump let out a slow breath as though her words pressed against his chest. You've given me a challenge, Grace, and I don't back down from challenges. A faint smile tugged at her lips. Then perhaps my husband's death and all those letters I wrote will not be in vain. They won't, Melania whispered. Tonight you've planted something. I see it in his eyes. Trump nodded. She's right. You've made sure I'll never step into a speech or a decision without hearing your voice and the voices of those empty chairs. Melania handed Grace a glass of water. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it, but her voice stayed steady. Mr. President, she said, may I ask something personal? Trump straightened. Of course. Have you ever sat with someone in their final moments? The room seemed to hold its breath. For once, Trump didn't have a quick answer. After a pause, he shook his head. No, I haven't, Grace nodded knowingly. Then you've never seen the raw truth of sacrifice. When the speeches are finished, the flags folded, the medals awarded, all that's left is a trembling hand and fading eyes. Melania brushed away a tear. That's something most people never witness. That's why it must be told, Grace said softly. Not to burden, but to remind. Trump looked down at his hands, his voice unsteady. Grace, I don't know if I'd have the strength to watch that. You do, she said firmly. Because strength is not in watching without tears. It's in watching, and carrying those tears with you so no one forgets. Melania reached for his hand. He clasped it, then looked back at Grace. You've asked me to remember the empty chairs. I will. You have my word. Though the ballroom was nearly empty, the staff and guards who lingered were visibly moved. Some quietly wiped their eyes. Grace noticed. She lifted her voice, no longer just for the president, but for all of them. Each of you has power. Maybe not as much as the man sitting here, but power nonetheless. The power to remember, to honor, to sit with someone's silence instead of drowning it in noise. Her words rippled outward. Trump looked at his staff, strong, disciplined people, yet many looked shaken. Melania smiled softly. You've turned this room into a sanctuary of truth tonight, Grace chuckled faintly. The truth doesn't need volume, only courage. Trump rose, adjusting his jacket. He stepped around the table until he stood before her. When he offered his hand, it wasn't with his usual firm grip, but with a gentleness that surprised everyone. You've reminded me that leadership isn't just power, he said quietly. It's stewardship, of stories, of sacrifices, of silences. I won't forget tonight, Grace accepted his hand. Then I've done my duty. Word of the exchange spread quickly beyond the ballroom. As Trump, Melania, and Grace stepped into the hall, families and members of the press waited. They hadn't heard everything, but the emotion on the faces of those who had left earlier told them something important had happened. Leaning on her cane, Grace stood as Trump gestured toward her. This woman has reminded me, and all of us, what sacrifice truly means. Tonight she told me the truth about war, service, and the cost borne by families. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Melania wrapped an arm around Grace's shoulders. She has given us more than a story. She has given us a responsibility. A hush fell. Then, slowly, one veteran in the back raised a salute. Another placed his hand over his heart. Soon the whole room followed, standing in silent respect for the woman who had spoken aloud what so many carried alone. Overwhelmed, Grace whispered to herself, "Daniel, your voice was heard tonight." As the evening ended, she reached into her worn leather purse and pulled out a folded envelope. Her hands shook as she held it out to Trump. "This is the last letter my husband wrote before he died. I've carried it for 50 years, but I've never shared it with a president. Until now." Trump carefully took it, his expression unusually tender. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Grace whispered. "Because you need to see what sacrifice looks like, not in numbers, but in words." Melania touched the envelope gently, as though it might break. "Would you like us to read it?" Grace shook her head. "Not now. When you're alone. Read it when you need reminding." Trump slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket close to his heart. "I promise I will." For the first time that night, Grace leaned back, looking lighter. "Then my husband's voice still speaks." Later, in the quiet of the residence, Trump and Melania sat with the envelope on the table between them. "Do you think we should open it tonight?" Melania asked softly. Trump hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready." She made it sound heavy. "Maybe heavy is exactly what we need to carry," Melania said, placing her hand over his. He nodded slowly. Together they unfolded the letter. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. "If this reaches you, I didn't make it back. Don't remember me for my uniform. Remember me for the laughter I shared, the love I gave, and the dreams I had. Tell my wife I never stopped loving her, even in my last breath. And tell our leaders we are not numbers. We are lives. Carry us gently." When Trump finished reading, the room was still. Melania's tears streamed openly. Trump held Daniel Holloway's letter in both hands, his voice low, almost breaking. Grace was right. This is the truth. In the days that followed, the letter never left his pocket. He read it before meetings, before speeches, sometimes late at night when the White House was quiet. It was no longer just paper. It was a mirror, Melania noticed. "You've been different since that night," she told him softly. "I can't shake their voices," he admitted. "The empty chairs, the trembling hands. It's all I see when I close my eyes." For once, instead of pushing those feelings aside, he let them guide him. At his next address to veterans, his tone had changed. The usual applause lines were gone. In their place, he spoke simply. "I met a veteran who reminded me that sacrifice is not only in battle, but in the silence that follows. We must carry that silence with us, not set it aside when the parades end." The crowd grew still. Then a slow, deliberate applause rose, spreading until the whole room thundered. It wasn't the usual cheer for a politician. It was something deeper. From her small living room, Grace wiped tears from her cheeks as she whispered to her husband's photograph. "Daniel, he heard you." Within days, news of the moment spread. Clips of the president's heartfelt words circulated across networks and social media. Veterans began sharing their own truths, letters tucked away, stories buried, confessions long unspoken. Melania called Grace personally. "Your courage has opened doors for so many to speak." "It was never about me," Grace replied gently. "It was about giving silence a voice." Across America, support groups filled. Families began to name the empty chairs at their tables instead of hiding them. Conversations that had been buried for decades finally surfaced. One evening, Trump turned to Melania. It started with one veteran telling the truth. "Look at the ripple now." She squeezed his hand. "That is the power of listening." Weeks later, the Trumps invited Grace to Arlington National Cemetery. Together they walked past rows of white stones until she stopped before her husband's grave. Slowly, she knelt, setting her cane aside. Trump reached into his jacket and pulled out the letter. Placing it against the headstone, he said quietly, "I've carried this with me. Tonight I return it where it belongs, Grace wept. Thank you. Melania laid flowers on the grave. Your husband's words changed us. They will not be forgotten. Through her sobs, Grace whispered, he would be glad to know his truth reached someone who could carry it further. Trump placed a hand on her shoulder. It reached me, and it will keep reaching others. At his next national address, he surprised the country. With Melania at his side, he told the story of Colonel Grace Holloway and her husband, Daniel. Then from the podium, he read a line from the letter. We are not numbers. We are lives. Carry us gently. The words echoed across the room and through television screens nationwide. Millions listened, many with tears in their eyes. At home, Grace clutched her cane and whispered, Daniel, your words are finally heard by the world.